Welcome to Cafe 229. My name is Joanne Chang. Today we have such an honor to have Rebecca Lee in our Tzu Chi Center. Hi, Rebecca. How are you today?
Lovely to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start with your book because I recently have access to this book, and I heard you gave a lot of talks during the pandemic. This is a very personal and very close to us that affects all of us. So you share a lot of your experience in this book with us. Would you like to tell us more about it?
Yeah, the book consists of the talks that were given during the early weeks of the pandemic, when we all got sent home in March of 2020, wondering where we would be able to find enough toilet paper and flour. Of course, everyone were very afraid. We knew very little about the pandemic, about the coronavirus. So I decided to start a weekly Dharma practice on Zoom with my Dharma students as a way to support them. These are all students who had attended retreats with me and are quite committed in the practice. And I thought maybe this is a way for me to support them and in turn support people in their life. And so every Friday evening, we would get together, do a meditation together, and everyone will take a turn to check in, share how they've been during the week. And then around the last 20 minutes of the time together, I will share a Dharma talk with them based on what's been happening the previous week in our world. And provide some Dharma teaching to support their practice. We did that for 10 weeks, and then around the end of May, we felt that everyone was more stabilized. They felt they could, there were some places that began to open up a little bit in the summer. That's when we ended the series. And I had a student who wanted to transcribe the talks because he found them quite useful as his practice in the summer. And towards the end of the summer, we floated the idea of perhaps it might be useful to publish this. And other students of mine who it's a professional editor, and they work together to put together the manuscript. And so we put together this small book, and a number of people find it useful for them so far, even though it's the content's very much about a pandemic, but it's in general about Chan practice in uncertain times. So which doesn't end even after the pandemic.
Totally.
Yeah.
I have read some very helpful tips. For example, don't let the media and all the news overwhelm you. Like, you got to be selective, and you have to spend limited amount of time just getting the correct news. So I love what you're talking about here. So you want to share more about how exactly we can apply during this difficult time? What you have taught them to use Chan meditation practice and Dharma. You are a Dharma teacher and a lineage of the Master Sheng Yen in the meditation. What did you teach them?
Well, for example, in the first talk, which is titled Allow Joy into Our Hearts. So talking about our tendency to focus on the negative things that are not working, things are not to our liking. So that was happening in the early weeks of the pandemic when people were really hating the fact that they couldn't go do things that they had planned. They were missing birthday parties, weddings. People were just very upset, and of course, all the deaths and all the just negative news, and everything seemed to be so horrible. And then they're stuck at home with their children, or and being alone. And just a lot of stress and just everything so negative. So our tendency is to only focus on the moments things are not going so well, like they're not to our liking. And then we begin to generalize as everything's so horrible. And then we begin to think that we begin to label our life and other people as bad, as negative, and then of course give triggers negativity like hatred and resentment in us. And that is vexations that bring suffering to us.
Right.
And so even though all that is happening, it's really, it's challenging and difficult, but we do not need to react with this aversion and hatred to make things worse for ourselves. Because when we are so agitated and upset, we are unable to be fully here with this settled and clear mind, and see clearly how we are first making things worse by being so agitated, and we are also less available to people around us. There's a very difficult time, and the chances are other people are also struggling, but we might become so consumed with our suffering that we are unable to see other people suffering and may become quite harsh, unkind to them, and judgmental. And instead of giving them what they really need in a time of struggle. Because when loved ones around us, they are stressed out, they are also afraid, and we may get so stressed, so irritated ourselves that we think that they are causing us suffering by being afraid. And instead of us being able to comfort them. So the first order of business is to look after our own mind. By engaging in Chan practice, meditation practice of settling the mind, cultivating this clear awareness of our body and mind, and then noticing this unhelpful habits of focusing on the negative. And then when we actually allow the mind to be settled, we will be able to allow joy into our hearts, because that's when we notice, oh, not everything is so horrible. You can hear the birds, you can see the blue sky, you can see people around you, they are being kind to you. Then actually those moments of joy will allow us to connect with the kindness and compassion in us, to ourselves and also for others.
I hear two messages there. I want to ask a little further. You talk about the labeling and also the negative things. I have students who came to me, I teach as well, and they say, I feel alone at home because everything's so isolated. But the solitude can be looked at from different perspectives. Instead of looking at negatively, we can view the same thing from different angle, rather being only settling on one label, which is a negative angle of looking at things, right?
Exactly. So that's exactly what I was talking about. The tendency of just seeing that, oh, this is so horrible. I don't get to do things with my friends, with people I like as I had planned. So, and then we label it as, I'm so lonely, this is terrible. And then we cause ourselves additional suffering by, this aversion. If we just sort of allow ourselves to settle in and see this moment as it is, we then can appreciate, now I have this time to myself. I can read, I can reflect on things that I have not had time because I've been so busy, or just do things by myself, like doing craft project that I just never had time to do. So being able to enjoy this time to ourselves, that had always been quite a luxury. And so seeing this completely differently and enjoy this moment as it is, instead of getting so upset with what is supposed to be and is not how it's supposed to be.
It's wonderful. So do you recall in any particular part or questions from your students you were asked constantly and you feel like it's helpful to them?
Well, one of the struggle that people had at that time was, when is this going to end? Right?
Never seeing the future, right?
Because they thought it would just be a couple weeks, and then they thought it would just be a couple months, and then is my job coming back? When will we be able to get back to work? When will we, that's that wanting to know and being frustrated that they don't know, you know, how this is going to be, how this is going to end, how this is going to affect their life. So that frustration of wanting to know already how the future is going to unfold. Yeah, and so that's why it's an excellent opportunity to engage in the practice, because we may have heard that everything is impermanent. Well, yeah, I know everything changes, but no, we actually don't really believe that. It's like maybe everything changes for everyone else, but like I already have plans and I want to know how things are going to unfold. And of course, it related to impermanence is everything is in flux, actually. Every moment is the coming together of causes and conditions.
Progress.
Yeah, we may hear that, you know, this is, I understand it, but actually we are living it all the moments. And so that's actually during the early weeks of the pandemic, it's a golden opportunity for everyone to really feel and experience directly what this means and how to be at ease with it.
Thank you. That's a very well spoken. That kind of reminded me the 4 steps by Master Sheng Yen, like face it, accept it, deal with it, and let it go. You know, I'm curious because you are a professor in sociology. What kind of examples are you setting as a silent Dharma teacher and meditation teacher? I'm curious about that.
That's an interesting question. I guess as a Chan practitioner, practice is daily life. So we don't, it's not like I'm working as a professor, so I'm not practicing. So one of the most obvious way is the way I show up in my classroom. When I go to class, I'm fully present. I have a fairly large class nowadays, and so I use my practice to make sure that I'm clearly aware of how everyone is there, and to make everyone feel they're included in the discussion, and also by emphasizing the importance of connecting the material with their life, so that they are not thinking that, oh, this is just some abstract concept out there that has nothing to do with me. Everything we encounter in life actually is, you know, we can find a way to connect with it directly. And of course, in sociology, there are many ways we can do that. For example, recently I just talked about how people act towards things based on the meaning that they attribute to it. And of course, we do this all the time, but it's not obvious. It's a theoretical concept. And so I try to explain to them that, like, how this shows up in our life, and how when we actually, when we are aware of it, we can become more empathetic, when we can become more understanding, even though we may not agree with how the other person interpreted the situation, but we can understand why they act the way they do, instead of thinking that something's wrong with them or they inherently bad person. And so in a way, that is also a way to help us to learn to be more empathetic, more compassionate.
Those are 2 very important ingredients to practice in the Buddhism path, right? And what is the challenges that you see for you to work as a Dharma and meditation teacher?
It's interesting because I think this is one of the most important contributions of American Buddhism, that is to recognize that female Dharma teachers as full teachers, and so many of the earlier especially in Zen Buddhism, they give full authorization to their female students, and there have been quite a number of very well-established female Zen Dharma teachers. Of course, Zen's not the only area, Vajrayana as well. And so in American Buddhism, actually female Buddhist teachers have been a commonplace But still, I've been told, at least in Chan, that's rarities.
Yes, traditionally, it's rare.
Yes, a few years ago, one time when I was talking with someone, I was in Taiwan. Someone came up to me and said to me that because someone like me exists as a female Dharma teacher, it helped her believe that she can practice. And so I think in what she told me, she basically succinctly summarized why it's important for there to be female Dharma teachers. Because if we don't only have male Dharma teachers, a lot of very sincere Dharma practitioners would just have this doubt in their mind that maybe because they're women, they won't be able to practice.
They think less of themselves.
Yes, and but because they saw that someone who was a lay person, who was a woman, actually can also practice, then maybe they think, oh, I too can practice.
Great. Well, the reason I asked that question is you are a very smart and successful professor, as well as a certified teacher and the Dharma lineage teacher. So all this rolled together it's a you set an example and a great role model for many female Buddhists or even mindfulness practitioners to follow in America. So I wanted to ask that question. I think it's very meaningful to the Chan tradition, and hopefully, the Chan tradition in United States isn't like huge yet. So that is a very important role and the leadership there.
Yeah, I think also it helps everyone understand the Chan teaching of formlessness. That like practitioners do not take certain forms. So maybe like some of us may have it in our mind that like practitioners takes like a monastic form, and that's why it was so important when Master Sheng Yen gave Dharma transmission to John Crook and Simon Chow, among others. Both of them are my teachers as well. And so it helps us. I remember I was one of the people, you don't need to be monastic to practice. And so, and then also like when women, especially lay women can also be teacher, then people can see, it's not just men, so I guess we have this tendency to think that the practice takes certain form. For example, some people think the practice only takes the form of sitting meditation, when actually we can engage in the practice doing all kind of activities, walking, eating, while we're talking, looking after children, doing dishes. Or daily life, Chan practice is daily life. And similarly, it's easy to fall into the erroneous view of thinking that only, good Dharma practitioners, Chan practitioners only take certain form. Either it is monastic or male, when, you can be your child who is a good practitioner there,
Bodhisattvas,
right? Indeed. Actually, one of the chapters in my book talk about learning to recognize bodhisattvas around us. So again, there's this tendency to think that, bodhisattva takes a certain form, is someone who looked very special, who had all these recognitions, and status, and maybe like with certain robe. But actually, we have a lot of bodhisattvas around us who are willing to put other people's benefits ahead of our own self-concern, and who are not afraid of going into people's suffering in order to help them. And so it is the practice of cultivating this total clear awareness that allows us to recognize the bodhisattvas around us. You may be living with one at home.
Just have to uncover that first, right?
And actually it is not so much what the other person's doing, is our ability to release a lot of blockages in our mind. We have this tendency to only focus on what the other person's not doing, how they are not meeting your expectation. And when we can see the total clear awareness of that person as they are, maybe you realize that, oh wow, like this person's a bodhisattva in their own way in my life. And when we see more bodhisattvas in our life, then we live in Buddha land. If we see everyone is terrible, this one is so terrible, that one's so terrible, then we live in hell. We create our own hell, or we create our own Buddha land.
So you are suggesting that we should have an open mind, a neutral mind, and be able to see things from different perspectives. So it's not in one way only or negative way only.
Yeah, you can say that to recognize the habits that we have that actually causes suffering for ourselves. So I earlier gave the example of the tendency to only focus on negative things. Some people, they have the opposite habit. They only look at people's good, but they purposely blind themselves from seeing that someone actually they have problems. Maybe they have a very entrenched habit of doing things that actually cause harm to others. And it is important to also see that. So we are not talking about only focusing on the positive things people do, or basically being willfully blind to harmful habits that someone has. So for example, we have someone who is a pathological liar, that they just can't help it. And then they will engage in these actions that will cause a lot of chaos or harm to people around them. We need to know that it's actually part of the reality of this person. Then we can maybe take action to help reduce the opportunity for them to cause harm to ourselves and to others. So compassion is not about just like throwing ourselves out there to be harmed. So that's why wisdom and compassion come together. This clarity, see that person, the full person, not only the negative side, not only the positive side, but everything. Everything.
Yeah, that's what you talked about in the book, clarity and compassion. I don't know if you feel like you have mentioned what are the first step, how we practice clarity and compassion if they are total beginners in mindfulness or even Buddhism practice?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think the first step is to learn to engage in some kind of meditative practice. Because we might be able to encounter these teachings about compassion and wisdom. You might have read something about impermanence or things like emptiness or things like that. One can become equipped with these concepts, but that is not enough. We need to train our mind, to settle the mind, to cultivate this clear awareness that we've been talking about, so that we first can cultivate this clear awareness of the moment-to-moment changes in our body and mind. For us to have this direct experience of the teaching of impermanence, for example. So that it's not just a conceptual understanding. It's like, oh, like my body really is constantly changing, and it's and it is a coming together of causes and conditions, not its own independently existing thing. It truly is true nature. Really is sunyata, a Buddhist term, which often is translated as emptiness or is into being, like Thich Nhat Hanh said. For example, like the weather today, allows us to feel a certain way. A couple of days ago, overcast, people feeling a lower energy, like our bodily sensations is coming together of causes and conditions. And what arises in our mind, same thing. What we might think, I come up with these ideas. Well, it has to do with what we have read recently, what emerges in our interaction with others, and what happened in the past. And so it's this flow of constantly changing bodily sensations and our emotional experience. Yeah, and so I would say start with learning how to engage in meditation with which is about learning to settle the mind enough to give us an opportunity to gain some insight into the moment-to-moment experience of our body and mind, as well as what happens around us.
Great. Okay, so settle the mind, practice meditation, moment-to-moment awareness. I love the word interbeing you mentioned. It's by Thich Nhat Hanh. Would you give us some examples of how we may help, like let's say beginners to understand how we relate to each other? What are the connections? How does interbeing accepted and understood? Let's say, how am I interbeing with you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because our default mode is to think that this is me, and I have I am like a self-contained, inherently, independently existing separate entity from you, and but that is not the reality actually. So, for example, just very concretely, the carbon dioxide that I breathed out a few minutes ago probably are in your lungs now.
Right, very possibly.
Yeah, and also the ideas that passed through my mind that I communicated, some of that are now part of your mind,
right,
and that also help you formulate some of these follow-up questions, because all these ideas that shape your questions were not part of you an hour ago, before we started talking.
Definitely.
Right. So and same thing, your questions, what you had shared, now it's become part of my mind, part of my consciousness. So where do I end and you begin now? Actually, the reality is interbeing or emptiness, or we're all interconnected. Is because of our erroneous view that make us believe that we are separate. So because as we observe this and realize this more, then it becomes very obvious that being kind to you is no different from being kind to me, because we are connected.
Yes.
When you are happy and joyful, I will be happy and joyful.
You'll feel it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Because you are a Dharma teacher, I'm taking liberty to ask this further. So I love your example, but they seem to be more invisible connections there, because your body is still your body, my body is still my body. So are we teaching our Dharma students that don't be so restricted to our visual boundaries, and because there's way more different dimensions, like air you were talking about, the exchange of ideas, these are not tangible, and they are just so intangible actually, and it's hard to measure, and it's not numbers we can calculate on. So this comes to the spirituality part. So are we saying that, pay more attention to this other dimensions of exchanges that we may have to connect as interbeing?
Actually, I would not go that way.
Okay.
Maybe I will give you a different example.
Okay.
Actually, it's very concretely, our action affect the other person. All right. So,
Yes.
for example, in the way I speak with you,
Yes.
my being respectful and harmonizing with you makes you feel comfortable and joyful.
Yes.
And that is a direct effect on your well-being.
Sure.
Right. So
Okay.
so whether how my body mind feels that allow me to act in this way
Okay.
affect your experience.
Sure.
And
Overall experience.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so that's why earlier I mentioned when we do not practice, when we forget to practice, we become irritable and we suffer. When we are irritable and we suffer, then I act out my suffering on you. Because first of all, when we are suffering, everything is a problem. So even though you're sitting there minding your business,
Right.
being this wonderful self as you are, I was like, you know, what is wrong with her hair? You know, everything is wrong. And then because I'm so irritable, so then it will lead me to say things that's unkind. For example, being critical of your hair when your hair is perfectly fine. And so, of course, then it affects your state of mind. And then you, and so in this very concrete way, we our well-being it's dependent on each other. And of course, the same time, when we suffer, we cause suffering to others. When others suffer, they cause suffering to us. And so I would say, rather than thinking about sort of these sort of like different way like of gauge, like tuning our vision or something, I think it's more about cultivating this clear awareness of the of our body and mind and the effects of our action on others.
That's wonderful. So summarizing what you just said, it's like when we make ourselves a healthy, happy person, it naturally spreads the goodness to others. So taking care of ourselves is taking care of others at the same time. If you are happy, people around you will be happy. And that's the first step to practice Dharma and Buddhism and mindfulness.
Yeah, that's an excellent summary, because taking good care of ourselves is wisdom. Because when we deliberately cause suffering to ourselves, that is not wisdom. And then when we are well ourselves, then it frees up ourselves to take care of others. At least we are not causing problem for others. That's the first step of compassion. And then we are more available to bring benefit to others. So that is the cultivation of wisdom and compassion.
Great. And that wisdom comes from what you said, the clarity and mindfulness, taking care of our well-beings mentally and physically. Wonderful. Wow, that's great. I love this conversation where it's going. As a Dharma teacher, do you have any other challenges or tips you would like to share with our audience, or anything you wanna, take in any further, and just feel like this is going to be helpful for post-pandemic, and for the students, for people who are, dealing with this post-PTSD, maybe. If you would like to say a few more words on that.
I guess really a couple of things. One is to be unconditionally kind to yourself.
That seems very hard, Rebecca. How do you do that? You want to give us more tips on that? Unconditional. That's the response I get a lot, and because I think partly because we live in a culture that's quite harsh. We're conditioned to be very hard on ourselves, to be very critical of ourselves, to really judge ourselves very harshly. A lot of people would tell me, I have no problem, like being kind to others and just give them a lot of slack. I just can't do it to myself. I said, but why do you discriminate against yourself? Interesting.
So the cultivation of compassion is to bring benefit to all sentient beings, and we are one of the sentient beings. So perhaps remembering why we discriminate against ourselves, exclude ourselves, and to be unconditionally kind to ourselves is really about recognizing these unhelpful habits of being very harsh to ourselves. And we might believe that by beating ourselves up, we are helping ourselves to become better, to improve, to be able to accomplish what we haven't been able to accomplish. Because we believe that, that's why we keep doing it, right? So then how about apply this clear awareness and ask ourselves, is this working? Because if it's not working and if we keep doing the same thing that hasn't worked, I heard that's the definition of insanity. And so maybe actually to really feel, connect with ourselves directly and listen to ourselves. And oftentimes we can hear this voice. Sometimes I hear, I would call it like the 4-year-old voice in us. It's like, you know, it's not because I don't want to do it, but like I am just so exhausted. I'm just so burned out. I just want to be able to take a rest. And it's like this 4-year-old child. It's like, you know, I want to do this, but I'm so tired. Can I take a nap? And now you're going to tell this child, no nap for you. And you may think that, oh, if I let myself kind of slack off and take a break, and I will just become lazy. No, you don't. You know, you will, if you just give yourself this little rest, it might just be not very much. And then you feel rejuvenated, then you can do what you have asked yourself to do. And so this sort of gentle tenderness to ourselves, to listen to this voice with us, asking for kindness, asking for understanding.
So that's wonderful. And also, I also hear that give ourselves more space and be more patient with and listen to our body and the mind, what we need, and be there for ourselves.
Yeah, like even just in the daily life, a lot of times people will kind of, like they're so exhausted and they push themselves and work another couple hours and you're not very productive. And it's kind of like a form of harsh treatment to ourselves. Like it's like we are slave driving ourselves. And so we can unlearn those unhelpful habits and kind of like, well, okay, I will take a break and then either I can come back to this, or if it's already midnight, maybe you do it tomorrow, right? So, so this the unconditional kindness, and even when sometimes we just kind of, we know we really need to do this, but you like tell yourself, I don't want to do this. And you may start hearing this critical voice of like, what is wrong with you? Why don't you want to do it? Do you have to do this? Like, to be okay with ourselves, even in those moments.
Okay, so I hear that very clearly. So it seems like that is the method to deal with the fast-paced modern society, to offer this unconditional love with ourselves, be patient and have more space for ourselves, and that will take care of ourselves first before we can do it to others. Yeah,
and that's an excellent point, because we spend the most amount of time with ourselves. So if we keep perpetuating this habit of harshness in treating ourselves, then how are we supposed to learn to be kind and compassionate to others? More likely, we will act out this habitual way of treating ourselves harshly towards others.
And that is a great point, because when you were talking about discriminating others from yourself for the unconditional love, that we are willing to give that to others but not to ourselves. And that brings us right back to the interbeing by Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about. If you let go the hold of the discrimination, you and me, that if we can offer others unconditional love, we can also offer that to ourselves. So if that the line is like loosened up, and then it will flow both ways. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
The discrimination part that you were mentioning. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate that. Do you have a final note and take-home message for our audience before we wrap this up?
Well, I guess besides unconditional kindness to ourselves is to remember that every moment is brand new. Every moment, we have never been in this moment before, even though it might seem like quite similar to yesterday. When we remember that every moment is the coming together of new, constantly changing causes and conditions that includes the state of our being, people around us, then it will remind us to be fully present, to be here, to be fully engaged with this unfolding present moment. And when we can live this way, we will naturally remember to be grateful for being in this unique emerging present moment right here, right now with you.
Yes,
and
non-discriminatively.
yeah, and also and in this way, it's we will naturally be able to touch the joy that's right here in front of us, instead of being stuck in this toxic habit of taking things for granted. When we take things for granted, that's because we forgot that this moment is brand new. Yeah.
Great. We can also apply that to our post-pandemic PTSD, right?
Yes.
So it's a moving on, but it's not just pandemic, it's moving on or vanishing. It's every moment it's changing. So we learn to adapt and adopt.
Yeah. And every moment is brand new, then we can release the habit of thinking that like, this is supposed to be like this. I want it to be like how it was before the pandemic.
Yeah,
right?
Attachment.
Yeah. And so that moment is the moment of suffering. But when we remember that this moment is brand new, it's like, oh, okay, like it's not going to be back in like before the pandemic anyway. So let me just be fully here to engage in this new moment.
That's a very important attitude. Well, untangle our past, because that always brings us where we are now. Like untangle the negative part of the past and bring us the present moment, and will open up the opportunities in the future without less of the history that may, drag us down, or if not, boosting us up.
Or you can integrate the cultivation of total clear awareness in this practice. Because when we are stuck in the suffering of wanting to go back to where it was, we are not seeing the new opportunity right here that take us to new adventures. It may actually be taking us to places that we will enjoy greatly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. It's such a pleasure to have you. I really enjoy our conversation today. I am very grateful. I feel like I've learned a lot today. Thank you for being with us today, and we're very happy to have you today. Thank you for coming to Cafe 229.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Well, thank you for watching Cafe 229. Thank you for Dr. Rebecca Lee to be here with us. I hope you enjoy our conversation, her clarity and compassion tips. I hope you stay with us and enjoy our episode today. Thank you.